As we begin our look back at the events of September and October of 1923, let's take a look at some of the individuals involved with a brief biography of each. Now, we've made efforts to have photos for the brief bios of some of those who were involved in the various parts of the riot, but unfortunately, we do have a few we weren't able to locate. We'll start our biographies with one of the central figures involved in the riot, John Goss, an African American. He was an inmate in the North Carolina prison system. There are some doubts as to his age. Some reports have him in his 20s, but we're fairly confident that he was in his 40s in the 1920s. Goss was a slight man, short in stature, and he was serving a 15-year sentence for burglary, a crime that occurred in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1912. He had served 10 years of his sentence and was up for an early release due to his good behavior while incarcerated. In fact, Goss had been appointed what was called a trustee, which as a prisoner meant that he had special privileges, including choice work assignments, and was even allowed from time to time to leave the prison camp to do tasks or get materials for the work project. In Mitchell County, he was serving in a prison work detail on the construction of the highway between Spruce Pine and the Ledger community. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, I'd like to note the big photo here is of a road crew working on that Spruce Pine to Bakersville Road in the time frame of the riot. We do not know the identities of the men or the date this picture was made or its exact location. Goss might even be in that photo. We just don't know. Now, the upper right image on the screen shows them pouring concrete on a roadbed in Mitchell County. This was part of building out the new highways that were to make it easy to travel from town to town in North Carolina. And in the bottom image is the famous North Toe River Bridge that stood prominently in downtown Spruce Pine from 1924 until it was replaced and demolished 62 years later in 1986. As you can see, this could not be the bridge the mob attempted to cross on September 26th. Even note that the image has a date of September 20th, 1923 wrote on it, just days before Goss's escape and the ensuing race riot. Margaret Alice Parker Thomas is another prominent figure in events leading up to the riot. Alice was a homemaker and was married to Mac Thomas. Their home was in the Googes Creek area of Spruce Pine. Alice was the mother of 6 children and the grandmother of 28. She lived for decades after the event, dying in 1958 at the age of 98 in Spruce Pine. Something of note about Alice has nothing to do with the riot. She was the granddaughter of Frankie Silver, who was hung for her husband Charlie's death in Morganton in 1833. Alice's husband Mac lived his entire adult life in the Spruce Pine area. He was born in Yancey County and was a farmer. He died in 1944 at the age of 82. Mac and Alice's sons were involved in the manhunt for Goss, pursuing him over the mountains and sharing in the reward for his capture. We next turn our attention to the town officials involved with the riot. We'll begin with Allie Nathan A.N. Fuller, the mayor of Spruce Pine from 1921 to 1924. Fuller was born in 1883 in Russell County, Virginia, in the southwestern corner of that state, and moved to Spruce Pine in 1913. He worked at several businesses over the years and was one of the founders of the Tri-County Oil Company. He also served as postmaster of Spruce Pine from 1934 to 1947. Fuller passed away July 12, 1947, at the age of 63 in the Veterans Home in Johnson City, Tennessee. He was a member of the Democratic Party, which is something that will become an issue during the race riot. Spruce Pine had 3 town aldermen in 1923. Here are brief biographical entries for each. First is William Breese W.B. Kester, a native of Pennsylvania who served as town treasurer. He was the superintendent of the English Mica Company and also owned the Spruce Pine Recreation Hall. That's the town pool hall, which was a notorious hangout of locals. He passed away in 1948 at the age of 68. Thomas Winton T.W. Deaton, Spruce Pine's sanitation officer, was a Yancey County native who was a dentist. His father, Gaston Penley Deaton, was instrumental in getting Mount Mitchell established as a state park. Deaton was a veteran of World War I and was one of the organizers of the Spruce Pine Rotary Club. He was a mover and a shaker, traveling extensively and being involved in Spruce Pine civic affairs in several roles. Deaton passed away June 3, 1933 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound after murdering his wife. He apparently had health problems at the time. He was only 38. Finally, Walter Eugene W.E. Lockridge, sometimes written Lockridge, served as the town clerk. A native of McDowell County, he was foreman at the Burleson Mica Company and was married to Viola Burleson, the daughter of Burleson Mica owner Jason Burleson. Lockridge enjoyed a long life, passing away in 1980 at the age of 90. Daniel Weisinger D.W. Adams, Jr. was the city engineer for Spruce Pine in 1923. He was born in Louisiana in 1873 and served in World War I as a lieutenant colonel. His father was a Confederate general, yet Adams was known for his progressive racial attitudes, including working to desegregate the schools in Old Fort. He invented the modern-day fire tower in Arkansas and the triangulation methods used to locate fires from those towers. He also owned a patent for an ejection seat for an airplane. In addition to his chief engineer role in Spruce Pine, Adams was the chief engineer of the White Coal Power Company based in the Flatiron Building in Asheville. White Coal Power developed a system of dams for hydroelectric projects in the region and also ran the Old Fort Water Works. Adams worked to bring water, electricity, and telephone service to Old Fort and helped design the sewer and water system for Spruce Pine that was being installed at the time of the riot. He died October 19, 1957, at the age of 84. Next are the main law enforcement officers involved in the riot. We start with Mitchell County Sheriff Robert C. R.C. Forbes, whose photo I don't have, a native of the Red Hill Herald community. He served one term as sheriff and was later a probation officer and custodial officer at a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He moved from Mitchell County around 1935, but returned here in retirement. He passed away in 1973 at the age of 77. County Deputy Edward Berry E.B. Hensley, pictured on the left here, was a farmer. He was from the Tocane area and was a veteran of both the Spanish-American War and World War I. His tombstone notes that he was a captain in the U.S. Army. Hensley died in 1944 at the age of 60. Spruce Pine Police Chief Lorenzo Hatcher L.H. Wright, pictured on the right, moved to the Mineral City from the Tazewell, Virginia area around 1910. He was a manager at a local sawmill as late as 1920. Soon after, he became police chief of Spruce Pine and, along with Hensley, faced down the mob on the bridge the evening of September 26th. Wright was dismissed as police chief by town aldermen in 1925. It was an acrimonious departure in which he disputed the board's action to no avail. He served as a police officer for Spruce Pine later in the 1920s. In the 1930s and 1940s, Wright was a deputy sheriff for Mitchell County and was involved in several high-profile criminal captures which earned him significant reward money. He died in 1948 at the age of 71. Dr. Charles Augustus Peterson rightfully claims the title as one of the fathers of Spruce Pine. Born in 1882 in the relief community of Mitchell County, he attended several schools, including the Tennessee Medical College and the North Carolina Medical College, becoming a physician. Peterson, along with John V. Cox and Tom Bird, purchased the land where Spruce Pine sits today from the Carolina Clinchfield and Ohio Railroad for $17,000. That's a little over $500,000 in today's money in the early 1900s, and they laid off lots for sale, creating the town. Peterson held a variety of civic positions in the community and led the move to build a hospital in Spruce Pine, in addition to being its first chief of staff. He also served as mayor and as a town alderman. At the time of the riot, he was the representative for the area in the North Carolina House of Representatives, a position he only held for one term. He later became a state senator in the mid-1930s, and there's an interesting story about that term that we'll come back to later in the program. Jason E. Burleson, one of the richest men in Mitchell County, made his fortunes in mica mining and processing in the region. Born at the Fields of Tow, today's Newland in Avery County, in April 1853, he began opening mica mines in the 1880s, and he started mica grinding operations in the early 1900s. He was the largest individual mica operator in the region. Burleson split his time between Spruce Pine and Atlanta, Georgia, holding mining interests in both North Carolina and in Georgia. In addition to owning the Burleson Mica Company, he was a farmer and dabbled in investments. He served terms as both a North Carolina state representative and North Carolina state senator, and was very active in Republican politics in western North Carolina. He was noted for having passed the 1901 law mandating compulsory school attendance in Mitchell County. That was the first such law in North Carolina. Burleson Hill in Spruce Pine is named for him, as his house sat where the present Spruce Pine Methodist Church is located, and the Burleson Mica House was across the road from it where today's Spruce Pine Cemetery is located. Burleson passed away in 1931 at the age of 77. He plays an interesting back-channel role in the riot, which again we'll be discussing later. John Van Bockelen Metz served as Adjutant General of the North Carolina National Guard from 1920 until 1951 and ordered the troops to Spruce Pine on September 28, 1923. Born in December 1876 in Wilmington, North Carolina, Metz led a distinguished military career, starting in the North Carolina National Guard in 1894, where he rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. He participated in efforts to secure the border with Mexico after Pancho Villa's raid and was called to federal service in 1916. In World War I, he served in 3 major operations, including the Battle of the Somme and the breaking of the Hindenburg Line. In 1920, he left the Army to become Adjutant General in North Carolina. He totally revamped the Guard organization in the Tar Heel State and led to the construction of armories in 28 North Carolina locations during the Great Depression. Metz was often called out to supervise Guard mobilizations similar to the one in Spruce Pine, along with any relief actions they undertook. In particular, Metz and the Guard was mobilized 11 times by Governor Cameron Morrison during his term to deal with uprisings and other strife in the state. He was the keynote speaker at the dedication of the Soldiers Memorial at Gillespie Gap near the Minerals Museum on July 4, 1927. In addition to his duties as Adjutant General, Metz served as the State Director of Selective Service during World War II. Metz died in Raleigh October 14, 1959, at the age of 82. Finally, Governor Cameron Morrison plays a central role in the events surrounding the riot. Morrison is a complicated figure. He's known as the Good Roads Governor of North Carolina, as his administration secured passage by the state legislature of the massive, for the time, $65 million bond issue. That's $1 billion in today's money. The bond was slated to construct 5,500 miles of paved roads between all of North Carolina's county seats, with several of those projects related to our story. Morrison also supported initiatives to improve education and efforts to increase business and economic activity in the state. His administration was lauded for its work on these fronts. Now, on the other hand, Morrison's past is checkered with racism. He was involved in the Red Shirt movement, which was committed to the restoration of white rule in North Carolina. He played a role in the 1898 white supremacist coup that removed the duly elected government officials of Wilmington, North Carolina, several of which were African Americans. Morrison's tenure as governor was scarred barely a month after it began when a lynching took place in eastern North Carolina. After the lynching, he vowed unequivocally that there would be no more lynchings while he was in office. He aggressively pursued that objective, using the state's National Guard to establish order and the rule of law in areas of unrest, which often involved prisoners or alleged criminal acts, many of which were African Americans. It was Morrison's belief that the state judicial system should be the arbiter of justice and not lawless mobs, hence his swift intervention in affairs. There are important consequences of this policy that will come up again later. In a local angle, Morrison's campaign manager for governor was Harriet Clarkson, the North Carolina Supreme Court justice who, like Morrison, was known for his racist views and actions as part of the Red Shirts movement in the coup in Wilmington. Later, Clarkson was the founder of Little Switzerland and was active in affairs there until his death in 1942. Cameron Morrison also served as a U.S. congressman in the 1940s. He passed away in 1953 at age 83 while on a trip to Canada. Next up, we'll look at what's taking place in Spruce Pine and in Mitchell County in the early 1920s and see some of the factors that may have led to the events of September 26, 1923.